You're listening to Contesting Wrestling, a podcast in which I, Evan Burke, a person who doesn't like wrestling, not professionally or anything, nobody pays me for that, but I am somebody who doesn't like it in my own time. And I want to explore, I want to understand why other people that I do like and respect as much as I don't like and respect wrestling do like wrestling. That's the best way to say that. This is going to be episode 2 of our exploration of Mick Foley, a character that I have a lot of feelings about, but
a person, not just a character.
A person, not just a... Well, where is the line between the two?
Characters.
Yes.
We'll get into all that.
Yes.
My name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in professional wrestling about 11 years, a lot of different levels. I've been, an announcer, a wrestler, a commentator. I've worked backstage. I've been around the block a few times, and I'm very happy to do this podcast with Evan. He's a great dude, and his mind... people in wrestling should listen to what Evan says, especially if he disagrees with you. You don't have to agree with him, but, process that and think about it. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Ben Abelson. I'm a professor of philosophy at Mercy College. I guess I can now a little bit more officially call myself a scholar of professional wrestling, as I have taken part in at least one piece of pro wrestling scholarly discussion at the recent WrestlePosium.
The plan is working.
That's right. And so I think that you wrestling fans should also listen to what I say about pro wrestling.
I also just want to say, if you are... The two groups of people who should listen to what I have to say are wrestling fans and non-wrestling fans.
Yeah, if you're outside
Right.
those two groups, maybe this isn't the podcast for you.
I am Katie Bella, aka Ref Katie, on Twitter. I have been a fan of wrestling since 2003, and I've been in the wrestling business since 2014, and I'm very, very tired now.
It's very tight. We're
Mentally.
recording this on April 15th.
That's right.
Yeah, and so that's think back to April 15th. This is going to be coming out later than that, and it will have felt like 1 trillion years since April 15th. So think back to that innocent time.
We are now over a month. We're just about a month into the whole quarantine COVID-19 situation. So
I got my stimulus check today, though,
Yes.
by check I mean pittance.
Yes, I received my crumbs from the overlords.
with Donald Trump's name stamped on them, he made sure that had to be done before they would be sent to us.
Yep. It was great. I was able to put it directly into the credit card debt that I incurred several years ago when I was unemployed after losing my job due to an injury. America's great. Let's talk about its greatest art form.
Yes.
Not.
And a simpler time when the worst thing that was going on in our lives was that wrestling was boring and hokey and monotonous, and Mick Foley came along and changed that to some degree.
I do actually just want to make one quick correction. America's greatest art form is jazz, but wrestling's up there.
I agree. I mean, there's also comic books.
I think as time goes on, people will start making a more scholarly argument for hip-hop.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely.
America's greatest art form is man butts.
Did we start that?
Something about the American diet, I think.
I started that.
Definitely makes them. Well, you've seen my ass. That's.
I'm not a historical doctor, right? Like I'm not a history doctor, but I do think people had butts before America.
You are an ass historian.
I'm an amateur ass historian. Yes, I do maintain a group of websites based around.
We could say you're an
the
ass
history of
man.
the ass. That's neither here nor there. You can listen to my other podcast about that.
He's part of the gun club.
Didn't somebody also describe a wrestler as a booty man at one point, and that was like different from?
Yes. Brutus the Barber Beefcake.
There was also
Ed
Billy
Leslie,
Gunn.
Was the booty man.
So one guy was an ass man and one guy was a booty man.
I believe I mentioned to you that the
Yes,
booty
those
man's
are two
finisher
separate
was the
gimmicks.
high knee, and then you got up and tried to leave, and we stopped
Yes. Well, now I can't leave. Now I can't
Excellent.
get up and leave now.
You're
so
stuck.
it's the
You have
perfect
no
time to remind me.
You have no excuse not to watch everything we specifically instruct you to watch. Right, Evan?
And yet, the first time we got together to record this episode, I was like, well, I didn't. There was like one thing that you sent me I didn't watch, and you guys were like, it was the most important thing, which I now understand why that is, by the way.
Let me give a bit of an overview for our episode today.
If he hadn't watched it, by the way, I was going to astrally project a vicious spanking onto him.
So let me give a bit of an overview of what we're watching today. We watched
Nicholas
a couple
Foley.
more. Yeah, we watched some of his Mankind matches.
This episode focuses on the era when Mick Foley was the character of Mankind,
Yeah.
specifically in the WWF.
And we watched his much lauded match with Shawn Michaels, which was his first big main event. And we watched his match with The Rock, which is infamous for other reasons. But more, we watched his promos, his vignettes, and the famous interview that Jim Ross did with him, which is one of the first, like, real pulling back the curtain things the WWE ever did. And he was the perfect guy for it. And, a lot of people at the time and still today weren't necessarily big fans of Mick Foley's in-ring style. But, as Evan, as you've learned, like, he himself is much more compelling than a lot of his matches. But let's get started with the Shawn Michaels match. Well, no, Ben, you go on.
Before that, the early vignettes.
Oh, the early vignettes.
The first
that's right.
vignettes.
We watched his introductory vignettes.
Can I make an analogy that I thought of that I'm going to guess other people have made before me because it's I was watching the interview segment, and I was like, oh, okay, so he's like, it's a very 90s thing. He's kind of a bit of the Nirvana of wrestling and a bit of like the Marilyn Manson of wrestling, maybe a fusion of those two. But like it was hilariously mid-90s, like, feel my anguish.
Yeah, very much so.
Totally,
and as I've said on this podcast many
Primo.
times before, wrestling works when its product reflects the culture at large at the time. Which is what it was doing exactly at that
totally.
point.
It was a bit late for Nirvana, but Marilyn Manson loomed large around that time in wrestling.
If you asked,
you had a tag team called the Headbangers, who literally wore Marilyn Manson and other metal associated.
I guess I'm just
t-shirts
thinking Nirvana because he's
matches.
wearing the flannel shirt. I guess it is a lot
yeah,
more
yeah.
overtly Marilyn Manson.
He wears the flannel shirt because he kind of has always worn the flannel shirt since the 80s. It's always been one of his trademarks. If you asked him who his musical inspirations were, he'd list a bunch of country artists. He's a big fan of like Emmylou Harris and shit. He always said that he
Emmylou
found.
Harris is great.
Oh yeah. See, he always said that in his mind, he never pictured like heavy metal in all the destruction. He pictured slow, beautiful music. I think that fits with his overall character, considering.
He does definitely represent a kind of angst that hasn't aged well.
Oh, yeah.
Like, listening to him, like, his big complaint is that, he didn't get a date in high school. Like, that kind of thing, which, is a source of anguish for many young men.
He never said,
but...
like, I can't get a date. Man, aren't women stupid? He said, I couldn't get a date, so I thought of myself as weird, so I started doing weird things, so everyone else started thinking of me as weird, and now look
Meanwhile,
at me.
Google his wife at the time.
Oh, right. He married, like,
that's the irony of it.
He married a beautiful model.
Yeah, when he's giving that interview, and the whole time he'd been in the wrestling business, they were together, I think. So, as far as, it's interesting because a lot of what that interview is doing, as Doc already alluded to, is blurring the lines or revealing how unclear the boundary is between his real life and the life of his wrestling character. But in some cases, it's definitely still a kayfabe. So just like to sort of set the stage for the introduction of Mankind into the WWE universe, the WWF at that point, what the WWF had been up until this point in, I think it's January of 96 that we start getting the Mankind vignettes. And there had been little intimations of a change in the presentation of WWE, of this like edgier style. You had the Diesel stuff in late 95, but still by and large the product was this milquetoast all for kids, cartoony, just not edgy at all kind of product. You know, the kind of thing that was best maybe illustrated by the Clowns and Kings sort of thing that we watched the first episode of. But these intimations were beginning to happen, and when Mankind started, when we got these vignettes, it was absolutely shocking. I mean, it was really like a complete disturbance of the general vibe of the WWF.
Yeah, you did have Gold Dust by that point, right?
That's right. There was also
Like, I would say until Mankind showed up, Gold Dust was probably like the edgiest thing that had happened. Gold Dust was still happening at that point. It was still like real weird.
He was the first one to do one of those sit down interviews with Jim Ross. Actually, was Goldust, and then the Mankind one followed.
To kind of illustrate how weird Mankind was when he came in, it's like his first couple of squash matches, like he faced Bob Holly, the race car driver. To give you an example of the kind of gimmicks that like he would be interacting with. I mean, of course, they immediately put him in a long feud with The Undertaker, which is perfect, but that's another story.
One thing that I liked in both of the matches that we watched was that there was a real juxtaposition between him and the character. And that he was going up against somebody who was sort of a brighter character, I guess, where it's like, I don't know, maybe if he was up against The Undertaker, I don't know, would it be too dark? Would it be too powerful?
Well, he did feud with The Undertaker a whole lot.
It made sense up front, of course, because they were the two dark characters. The question when they first signed him wasn't even so much like, oh, can he face The Undertaker? The question is, okay, so after he feuds with The Undertaker for a few months, is there going to be any more worth in the character other than another demon for The Undertaker to slay? Which there was.
Undertaker went through this slew of characters that they brought in or created pretty much just to feud with him. Your Giant Gonzalez and even Kamala.
Yeah, they brought in Kamala for The Undertaker. When they tried to turn him face, it just fizzled out.
And then, like, he went through the entire $1 Million Corporation of, like, King Kong Bundy and Kama, the Supreme Fighting Machine, and all those guys.
IRS took the urn.
And then Kama melted it down and turned it into a gold chain.
Right. A lot of bullshit.
They even did Undertaker versus Undertaker. Right? Because they ran out of monsters for Undertaker to fight. So when Mankind, his first in-ring debut, he has a job match early in the show, and then at the end of the show, he immediately attacks the Undertaker. So like right from go, they did that feud.
Would you say that Mankind is meant to be an other that we fear, or is he meant to be the monster that's inside all of us?
I would say more the latter.
Yeah, I think he's supposed to be a reflection of the wrestling fans.
He's never really portrayed as like a real monster. He's portrayed as like a very human monster.
Yeah.
You know, he's someone who's completely lost his sanity.
You know, they did more of these vignettes for him to open. We only watched a couple of them. Like, more of the backstory, which, like, they never really kept up, is that he always had that rat with him. He talked about how when he was a little kid, he would play the piano and, like, people would like it. And then he broke his fingers, like, with a hammer, which is why he wears the thing on his hand. And all of this was very intriguing when you'd never heard anything like it. And very specifically, to answer the question, it was both, you know. He talks about in his book, the name Mankind, that he wanted to be Cactus Jack, and they didn't want Cactus Jack. They wanted something they could brand, and that was the WWE's MO at the time. And he said that Vince McMahon said to him when he had his meeting with him that, you know, we had all kinds of crazy names for wrestlers, but you're a mutilator, so we're going to call you the Mutilator. And he thought that was just awful. And they said, we want to call you Mason the Mutilator. And he said, thinking on his feet, he thought...
Mason the Mutilator.
Mason the Mutilator.
I'm just turning that around in my brain.
They almost called Stone Cold Steve Austin Chili McFreeze.
What?
Yeah.
So the creative process has hits and misses, and sometimes those hits are real narrow.
This was totally in line with the characters that they were doing at the time.
Oh, yeah,
you know?
like Man, Mountain, Rock and stuff.
Was he going to have ice powers in that with that character?
They were like, well, let's, you know, his name was just the Ringmaster, and they're like, well, how about if his character is like a little colder? And so some of the names they came up with went way too
He's
literal.
a
with
stone
that
cold
kind of thing.
killer. Let's call him,
Right.
I don't know, Chili McFreeze.
Ice Dagger.
Right, Ice
Yeah.
Dagger.
Oh,
So-
so the Chili McFreeze was something that was a way station on the way to Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Well,
Yes.
Right.
his wife at the time, I believe, ended up accidentally coming up with Stone Cold. He said it in there was that documentary they did years
Yeah.
like 15 years ago now, where like he was talking about his first wife, the British
Is his
woman.
name Steve Austin?
No,
Now it is.
yeah, now
He
it
had
is.
it legally changed. But originally he was Steve Williams,
Which was
but he
already
couldn't
a
be Steve-
wrestler.
Yeah.
Williams.
Yeah.
Dr. Death
That
Steve
doesn't
Williams
work.
was already a wrestler. Apparently, like she came up to him with his tea or something and said it was getting stone cold, and he was like, "Wait a minute,
Yeah.
that's the one."
It fell into place. Yeah.
Just picturing him sitting there like he's thinking like, all right, I'm going to go out there. I'm going to be Steve Chili McFreeze Williams.
Chili McFree.
Oh,
And then his wife's like,
Well,
what about?
Chili McFreeze ended up being an XSW
for a hot minute there. We had a Chili McFreeze.
in a dark universe. He still is
To
there.
finish the story about Mankind's name, he said he was thinking on his feet and had come up with stuff, and he countered Mason the Mutilator by saying, how about we say Mankind the Mutilator? And Vince didn't get it, and he said, well, I can be talking about both myself, Mankind the Mutilator, and Mankind as a whole, Mankind the Mutilator.
Works on
And he
two
said he
levels.
was so happy, and he didn't know until he had like his first dark match that not only did they go with Mankind, because Vince thought about it and said, yeah, that's good, we'll use it. Because Vince is malleable if he likes what you say. Anyway, not only did they go with Mankind, but they dropped the Mutilator. And they used another thing of his that we didn't see anything of in this episode of the stuff that we watched. He had different music to enter the ring. He had like that dark brooding theme you hear in the vignettes. And once he won the match to exit the ring, it was beautiful piano music.
That's right, yeah.
As
I
though
forgot
his
about that.
soul had been soothed.
Right, because he loses both the matches.
Right. I mean,
we
he was an
watched.
excellent loser.
The music that plays during the Jim Ross interview is
Yeah.
almost the Twin Peaks music.
Yes.
Like it
That was
feels
his
like they
entrance
said
music.
like we. Oh, wait, that was his entrance
Right.
music. It feels like
Yeah,
they were
yeah.
like, let's see how close we can get to the Twin Peaks music without having
They were
without
pretty good at
copyright
that.
issues.
I just want to say also to your point, Doc, and answering Evan's question, there's definitely a continuity between the anti-hardcore Cactus Jack stuff that was going on at the end of his run in ECW that we talked about on the first premium episode and the Mankind character. And that comes out a lot when he's doing the interview with JR, where it's like, he's a reflection of the worst impulses of the fans because he realized that what makes him special and that what people want from him is for him to harm himself, is for him to go through terrible pain and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like everything that I'm doing to the other wrestlers, everything I'm doing to myself, my mutilated form and all that stuff. And actually the very first vignette he does is just a close up of his missing ear. On the side of his head. And it's like, all of this is you have created this, the crowd.
And Evan, did you catch all the bald patches that he had, like, on the top of his head?
Just the completely different hair lengths at every possible.
He would,
angle.
like, rip out his hair in his matches.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would.
Right?
Just
Like in
clumps
his
of it
early
and just
matches?
show the camera and throw it
That's-
down.
Ooh.
So
Right?
he gets introduced after these vignettes. He starts to feud with The Undertaker. At SummerSlam 96, he has a boiler room brawl with The Undertaker because those vignettes were filmed in the boiler room, or they were supposed to have been taking place in the boiler room, I guess, of whatever arena they happened to be in.
Of the arena they were in.
And so they did this boiler room brawl, which was actually one of the first kind of on location kind of matches that they had filmed. Like they filmed everything in some boiler room rather than in the ring. And at the end of that match, Paul Bearer, the Undertaker's longtime manager, turns on the Undertaker and joins with Mankind.
The keeper of the urn.
Also, this is not the first time I've seen Paul Bearer, but this is, I think, the first time I've seen like a full Paul Bearer oriented promo.
Yeah.
And he's pretty amazing.
He's great.
Pretty amazing character.
He's incredible. He unfortunately he's passed away by now, but he was one of the best managers of his time.
That he had a long and successful career. Before he was Paul Bearer, he was his manager name was Percy Pringle III, and he did like an over the top rich kid gimmick who like bought wrestlers to fight for him. And I may have said this the last time we talked about the podcast. My favorite Paul Bearer story by far that he told in interviews is that when they hired him as a manager, he had been out of the wrestling business for about a year.
He's actually a funeral director, right?
Yes, he's actually a
He
funeral
was actually
director.
a funeral director.
His real name is William Moody. It's perfect.
Great.
That's just such a great shoot name too.
Yeah, Bill Moody. And so Vince McMahon calls him into his office to meet him in person with his guys like him and Pat Patterson and Bruce Pritchard at the time. And he brought a resume because he wanted to be a professional. Like, well, this is a good opportunity. And he passed the resume and they looked at it and they saw that he was actually a funeral director. He was a real mortician. And like Vince looked at the guys and he said, he's a real mortician. And they all just start laughing and he has no idea why. Because they didn't tell him what the character was going to be or who the Undertaker was. They just thought,
that's fantastic.
We want you to be a manager.
Yeah.
They look at it. He deals with dead people. You'll fit in great. It's like, yeah.
The last time he was on WWE TV, they literally killed his character on screen.
They buried him in concrete.
Oh, that's a good bad match for us to address with Evan at some point.
And
So
then
let's
when
end it
he was
there.
actually dead, they did a thing where CM Punk like spilled out his urn. Like,
yeah. Everybody that knew him said he would have wanted exactly that, and that he would have gotten a kick to know that even though he was dead, he was involved in a main event angle. So that's well done. So after a long and successful feud with The Undertaker, not after, really in the middle of it, once they realized that he was sticking around, they gave him a big match with Shawn Michaels, who was the world champion at the time.
I don't remember exactly what Paul Bearer's reasoning was for betraying The Undertaker.
Because it'd been with him for like 5 years.
Okay, fine.
I think that was it.
Time to change it up. But I mean, the kayfabe reason.
I really don't think they gave a big reason. I really don't think so. He's just an evil character that turned evil, and like kids accepted it. Why did they need any more?
So at the time, this was only a few months after Shawn Michaels beat Bret Hart at WrestleMania 12 for the world title in the Iron Man match that we watched. And I think they were short on challengers for Shawn at the time, too. I think he beat Diesel after that and sent Diesel packing to WCW.
They were going to have an extended feud with Vader.
Right.
Then Shawn faced Vader at SummerSlam, and Shawn didn't like working with Vader, and Vader wasn't nearly as good as he was when he was as good as he had been, and they just cut that feud short, which left them the September pay-per-view. Well, we need a heel. And they had just done already several matches with Mankind and The Undertaker, and Mankind had surprisingly won all of them. Nobody was beating The Undertaker before Mick Foley came around, which really helped, by the way. Yeah, what a concept. Put your new heel over the top guy.
So this is...
So even though there was, nobody thought Mankind was going to win the title or anything, but he was a top heel. They could have a match.
This is the In Your House Mind Games pay-per-view. The In Your House pay-per-views were... So originally there were just the big four: WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, and Royal Rumble. And then Vince was like, well, we want to do a pay-per-view every month. And at first they didn't think that people would buy like a fully priced pay-per-view every month, I think. So they introduced these shorter, cheaper pay-per-views in the like off months of the big four called In Your House. And they would have like a subtitle. And this one was In Your House Mind Games.
Yeah, they'd be 2 hours instead of 3 hours. Ironically enough, they all kind of flopped, and then they lengthened them to 3 hours and made them full price, and then they all sold. Because people...
And then people just started buying a full price pay-per-view every month.
2 if you were watching WCW, too.
By the time it got to 2004, 2005, WWE had oversaturated its own market.
Yeah, that was
pay-per-views.
years later.
Much later on, yeah.
People didn't want to buy the cut rate ones because they figured they must be cut rate pay-per-views.
And this is actually why a lot of people asked AEW when they first made their pay-per-views, they made them like $55 or something, full price. and people were like, well, people aren't going to pay for that. And they looked at this earlier kind of market research based on the in your houses and stuff like that, and found that the higher price pay-per-views actually tended to do better because people saw them as more valuable.
You have to put value on your own product.
Exactly. It's exactly.
And I guess also, I would guess that there's an element too of it being like, a fun thing. Like everybody gets together and chips in a few bucks for the pay-per-view, and it's sort of like a social aspect. And yeah, and you're right that like it does sort of seem like that is a weird thing our brains do, where if something is like, as the price drops, we're like, oh, it's a good deal, it's a good deal, it's a good deal. But then as it goes lower and lower, we're like, oh no, now it must just be shitty.
Yeah,
right? So I don't want
if
that.
I see avocados at the market for 99 cents each, I think that's a bargain. If I see avocados 3 for $1, I figure there aren't any good avocados in that pile.
Yeah. You figure like you're gonna cut the avocados open and they'll have those weird strings in them.
It's not gonna be good.
Anyone else ever get that?
Yeah.
Those are government listening devices.
So
okay.
Excellent.
You find the same strings if you open up a bird.
So we get this match, and I think you watched the promos beforehand, right, Evan? With you mentioned the Paul Bearer promo.
Yes.
And Shawn Michaels still looking straight out of 1988. It's like insane earrings.
Oh, he's wearing a
motorcycle cap.
A crop top made exclusively of tiny mirrors.
Yeah, exactly. He looks like he plays drums in Poison, you know?
And so the contrast between him and Mankind was as extreme as you could get.
Yes.
Mankind with his weird mask and I don't know exactly how to describe his attire. Just
brown.
Yeah, really dark clothes with like brown trim, and I don't know. But so they have the match. I think JR says at the beginning, one of the announcers is like, there will be injuries in this match tonight. It's like, yeah, so we were, I don't know. As a kid, I really didn't know what to expect from this match. It seemed hard to imagine what it would look like to have Shawn Michaels wrestle Mankind. And I think that's what was so interesting about it, was this contrast. And especially as the match starts, Mankind comes after Shawn with like this brutality. And the big surprising thing is Shawn almost immediately begins to match it. He's like, oh, we're doing this now. Okay, I'm going to do my craziest dives at you. And, oh, you're going to pull up the mat to try and pile drive me on the floor. I'm just going to dive on top of the mat on top of you and pin you down.
I really like that one because it subverted what people expect when somebody pulls the mats up. And Shawn wasn't a big story of the physicality of the match is Shawn wasn't going to let Mankind do anything to him. He was going to have to fight for every inch that he got. And Mankind was there with him. Like, a lot of people were surprised at how good his cardio was. Guys who have worked with him were surprised at how good his cardio was for what his body looked like. And this was, he just kept the pace with Shawn Michaels the whole time.
I was expecting, I didn't know what to expect from this match. I was kind of expecting, I think, to enjoy it more than I did. I think I know what my basic problem is with a lot of Foley's matches. Mm-hmm. And I think this kind of also links into a greater point about whatever sort of taste I'm developing for wrestling. Because last time we were doing a Foley episode, one of the last couple episodes we did, we were talking about, I was worried that I was a snob, right? I was worried that I'm developing a style, that I'm developing a taste for just like a high-flying, very technical style. And I was really thinking about that, and I don't think it's that. I think what it is that I like a dynamic match. And dynamic in the sense of feeling like there's more of an ebb and flow and highs and lows. And I kind of I feel like Mick Foley is kind of like a punk rock song to me. In that he comes out it's part of why I'm not as much of a punk rock guy.
It's one tempo, one feel.
Yeah, exactly. It's one thing. It's really unique. If you like that thing, it's awesome to just get these blasts of it, but it doesn't. Yeah, I feel like he comes out and it hits a certain pitch and then it stays at that pitch the whole match. until the end it starts to fray because they're so beat up and kind of taking a while to get there. So I think that's part of why I haven't been super into his matches. This is not a comment on him as a performer. I kind of feel like he's a performer. I think he is an interesting performer. I am not super interested in his performances, at least within the ring, but his promos, I could watch. All the promos and stuff. I could watch all day.
Yeah, when I was watching this match again, I got at the beginning, it's really exciting and interesting, and the end is, and I felt in the middle, as it sort of, it's a main event match, right? So it's going to be like 20 minutes or something like that. I definitely got to a point where I was like, I'm pretty sure Evan has lost interest by now.
It's weird. I definitely wish I had more to say about the match. Like, I thought it was a really good match. I just don't have anything specific to say. It was just a good match.
I got a few specifics. I mean, obviously Foley has always been one of my favorites. Although Evan, I completely get what you're saying about it, and I think your comparison of him to more like a punk rock song or a punk rock band or whatever is completely spot on. And at the time when when the whole concept of alternative throughout from what it was from 90 through to 2000 happened, Foley was a big part of that in wrestling, not necessarily like Nirvana per se, but
sure.
In the match, Shawn just matched the style. This is why I'm always so impressed also with Shawn Michaels, because he always wrestled his opponent's match. He's like, what are you good at? I'm going to do that as well as you can possibly do that, And they did a lot of wild brawling, but they didn't necessarily do way too much. They did the one ridiculous table spot at the end, which I remember seeing as a kid and thinking, surely they have died.
That was only the second table spot we had ever seen.
The first one with Brett and Diesel.
And both of those spots, what makes them so good is you don't see them coming at all.
As opposed to now where it's almost a dance where you set up the table and then tease the table and then do the one thing everyone does with the table.
And first the crowd chants for the tables because they've come to expect them in any hardcore match. But I thought the other thing that Shawn did that was really cool was working Mankind's fingers.
Yes.
He's like, oh, you got broken fingers, eh? Well, I'm going to bite them and stomp on them.
Now you can't put me in your hole. Nasty. Oh, Evan, did you catch that? Mankind did the move where he catches his head between the top two ropes.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the thing
the
that
move
happened
where he lost his ear.
Yeah, he didn't lose his ear in that match. That's the move that he did in Germany, and the ropes were too tight. And he says that it wasn't so much that his ear was torn off as much as his head slid down through the ropes, it was pushed off. I just wanted to say that because it's nasty.
Yeah, I appreciate that distinction.
I thought it was really clever because they wanted to show him putting Shawn in the mandible claw at some point.
Right.
So they had him do it then when his head is stuck in the ropes. So it's not going to end the match.
Is the mandible claw a Foley invention?
No.
Yes.
Okay. So no.
What? No.
So it's an interesting story how the mandible claw came up. It was
because it feels very invasive.
It is
compared to all other wrestling moves.
This week on AEW, Britt Baker, who's a dentist. She's actually a dentist.
Wait, what?
She does the mandible claw, and she's reaching. She's about to do it, and then she's like, "Wait, that's not hygienic. That's not a good thing to do right now. Referee, give me your glove before I stick my fingers in my opponent's mouth."
Cool. Let's put a pin in that.
Well, Mankind did have the most of the time that cloth covering. So the first guy to do the mandible claw was a guy who was an actual doctor. His name is slightly escaping me. It was a Dr. Shepard. He was the guy that I believe The Fugitive was based off of. And once his name was cleared, he wasn't going to go back to being a doctor. He became a professional wrestler, and he developed with his knowledge of nerves and shit that hold. So the hold specifically is supposed to be, although nobody actually does it like this in wrestling because it's supremely painful, is you take these two fingers and you put them below somebody's tongue and you squeeze there.
The middle finger and ring finger.
Yeah, try doing it to yourself. It really hurts.
I didn't know that story. Is that in the book?
And that's where Mankind got that. Yeah, that's where Mankind got it. It's in the book.
I am trying to wrap my brain around that.
I don't remember. Wait, that The Fugitive starring Harrison Ford is about this guy?
Yeah, it's a they take liberties in Hollywood, of course. I think it's The Fugitive.
Damn, I do not recall that at all. Cool.
Ow. I just did it to myself. Ow. It's a nerve thing,
Yeah, it's
right?
a nerve thing, exactly.
Because there's such a huge nerve
it
right
can
there.
be paralyzing.
Oh yeah.
And it's unlike any hold anyone had ever seen in wrestling.
Yeah, that's how they
before,
sold it, was that it was totally paralyzing.
So if they had made a historically accurate sequel to The Fugitive, you're telling me that would have been a movie in which Harrison Ford becomes a professional wrestler and uses his medical knowledge to develop a devastating and invasive hold that would later be popularized by Mick Foley.
Yes, I believe so. And I'm actually
Okay.
I'm double checking this right now to make sure I didn't get a big detail
Please double
wrong.
check that. Because I want it to
Me
be
too.
true. Learning that The Fugitive was based on a vaguely
Pretty
true
sure it was
story is in and
All
of
of
itself.
this is weird.
Shocking me.
It's most surprising
Okay.
for me just because I read that book and I feel like I would have remembered that specific detail. But
Sam
you know,
Shepard, right?
Foley does all this.
That's the
Oh,
name.
sure.
Oh, give me 1 second to actually look this up before we go on.
All right.
The fandom, wrestling fandom, says it's originally called the mandibular nerve pinch finishing hold. 1960s osteopathic physician turned wrestler Sam Shepard.
And he had the same name as a famous playwright.
Yeah. It's a fairly common name. Yeah. Samuel Holmes Shepard was an American neurosurgeon. He was exonerated in 1966, having earlier been convicted of the 1954 murder of his wife. Case was controversial from the beginning, yada, yada, yada. I refer you to Wikipedia, but that's the guy who brought the mandible claw to professional wrestling.
Wow.
In the late 60s. And,
Wow.
Mankind's the kind of guy who
Fascinating.
would, he's a real intelligent guy and he's a brainiac. He reads a lot of books, and he's the kind of guy who would have found that out and been like, nobody does this hold, but it's a great hold. And he said he had to sell the hold to Vince and everyone because people are like, well, why don't you just bite your fingers? And
Yes,
he's like, 'cause
exactly.
it's a nerve hold. The person can't bite your fingers if you really get it in. Oh, it's a nasty hold. Okay, so
It's a nerve
And
thing.
I guess if you're strong enough, your arm muscles are going to be
Yeah.
stronger than somebody's jaw muscles.
well, think
right?
about
Like,
these
yeah.
two fingers under your tongue, and then the thumb under your chin, and then you're clamping down like that.
Ugh. Oof.
Oh man,
Yeah.
horrors of holds.
Foley did all of these little weird, disturbing kinds of things. Like he had that hold. He's squealing.
Oh, he's squealing.
In pain when he's selling all the time. When he takes a pen and just starts jamming it into his knee to get his knee to work again during the match.
ridiculous.
Everything that's just like a little off-putting, a little weird, and it was very
So
effective.
Dave Meltzer gave this match 4 3/4 stars. He said he would have given it 5 stars if it didn't have like the lame run-in fuck you finish where there was no satisfying.
That was
There
good,
was going
yeah.
to be no satisfying finish to that match anyway because of the circumstances of the booking. The cool thing is that they did the fake coffin trick where Mankind was in the coffin, then they closed the coffin, and then they opened the coffin, and the Undertaker's in it. And that's always good if you can get the timing of it right. And Paul Bearer's reaction, screaming when he sees the Undertaker, is just classic. Paul Bearer was an incredible performer in everything he's been, and he added to it.
The whole thing was so great that I didn't even remember the fact that it was a fuck finish.
Yeah.
Like I had remembered like I don't know, like Sean somehow rolling him up.
No. They decided not to beat him.
Yeah, it wouldn't have made sense for Mankind to lose at that point. Who did eventually beat Mankind the first time?
I don't know. Maybe the Undertaker.
What was the first time Undertaker beat
I
Mankind?
don't know. That's a very good question.
We're going to have to look into that.
Yeah.
That'll be something for the
All right,
mini-sode,
cool.
I suppose.
Sorry.
I was
go
going
for
to
it.
say, do you have anything else to say about this before we move on?
Oh no, I'm ready to move to the hospital.
I am too, yeah.
Well, the hospital, that comes like
The hospital's later.
later. We're gonna
Okay.
get to the JR interview.
Yeah, if we're going to do this in chronological order.
Okay.
So
All right.
So
That makes sense.
you go ahead and introduce the JR interview.
All right, so the JR interview, they started doing these sit-down interviews with JR, with Jim Ross. This was right after Vince sort of declared that WWF was going to have a new kind of presentation, a new image. It was going to be an edgier, more realistic in certain ways kinds of product. They had already done this with Goldust. And in the Goldust one, just like in this one, they mined his personal life for details that could then be brought into the fictional universe.
Is this pre or post screw job?
This is pre-Screwjob. So these interviews were broadcast between May 19th, 1997
May
and
19th.
June 9th, 1997. Yes, May 19th.
May 19th. Don't ever say that, Ben.
I know. Well, I did already. So
Yeah, this was
so
right
yes.
before. This was a couple of months before the Screwjob is when this finished coming
Yeah,
out.
4 or 5 months before the Screwjob. So, yeah. So it was already the Attitude Era, right? This is after WrestleMania 13. So after the Austin Hart double turn, but before the Screwjob.
It was really a remarkable year in the history of the WWE if you just watch the TV week to week. Like, everything changes, and whatever doesn't change has to be left behind. And unfortunately, that included Bret Hart. They start broadcasting these interviews that they filmed earlier. They just filmed them earlier. They didn't realize that Foley would come off like so interesting and really sympathetic to their audience. They thought he's a heel. He'll just be a heel. But this was Mick Foley's face turn. And by the end of them broadcasting it, he was met with cheers because people are like, oh, he's just a regular guy who got fucked by the system.
He's a loser. We're losers too.
Essentially.
Some of the really cool things they did there, I talk about mining his personal history. They brought up this video he had made when he was a kid, or when he was like in
18,
college.
19.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he wanted to be a wrestler, and this was sort of the first mainstream exposure of backyard wrestling. The idea that, he wanted to be a wrestler. He saw Jimmy Snuka jump off the cage in Madison Square Garden. So he went and made a video of himself jumping off of his roof onto mattresses and being this character Dude Love. I thought it was cool that we watched the Shawn match and then this interview, because in the interview he talks about he's still referencing Shawn Michaels, so he's still dealing with him in some capacity. And he's talking about how when he was growing up, he didn't want to be Cactus Jack. He wanted to be Shawn Michaels, and that just didn't pan out for him. The other really cool
He
thing,
does at one point say to JR, he mentions, he's like, the first time I met Shawn Michaels, do you know him?
Yeah, I thought that was great. You know Shawn, right?
That's awesome. Yeah.
It really sells that he doesn't hang around with the guys. He hangs around in the boiler room. He doesn't know.
Man, that video of Foley falling off his roof is basically why they had to start telling kids not to try stuff at home.
That's true.
Yeah, man.
Now, what they don't go into too much detail about the fact that him and his friends made a full movie. It wasn't just let's film you doing a couple of promos and jumping off your roof.
The Loved One.
Yeah, it's called The Loved One. It's like an hour-long movie. Foley has said, him and his friends were drunk the entire time they were doing it. And he also really wants fans to know that even though he did get his first couple of indie bookings through, people liking the movie, it was years before he got any real notoriety or any good-paying jobs. He got where he was in wrestling by going through the grind, not because he jumped off his roof that one time. So don't just jump off your roof that one time and think you're going to be a star. That's not how that works.
We had a VHS of The Loved One that I think we watched once.
Yeah.
Right now, I cannot find it anywhere online. He has scrubbed it from the internet as much as he possibly could. But the other really cool thing about these interviews, besides developing this more fully fleshed out Mankind character, is this was one of the first times we ever saw them referencing other promotions. Like the fact that he was Cactus Jack elsewhere in wrestling. The WWF didn't want their fans to know that there was such a thing as elsewhere in wrestling. And they already started doing that really right around the time that Mankind was first introduced, when they did the Billionaire Ted segments and they were going after WCW directly. But now they were talking about Japanese wrestling. And
clips of Japanese death matches.
Yeah, all this stuff that we... watching it as a kid, I was like, what is all of this shit?
I was also wondering, was it unusual to have such continuity of characters? Like to have a wrestler there talking about other characters they had been before, even if it was in the same, even if it was within WWE, that was unusual at the time.
If you changed your name, unless they specifically said on television they're using another name, you were a different person. And the previous person didn't exist.
Yeah, they debut someone and never mention any of their past activity whatsoever.
Yeah.
Sometimes week to week. I remember one week there was a guy named Friar Ferguson who was like,
Yeah.
a Catholic friar. And then the next week he was Bastion Booger. And his gimmick was that he was disgusting. I mean, not
same
too
guy.
far off.
They were very different gimmicks. Friar Ferguson would dance.
Right.
They got several complaints and pulled the character quickly.
I thought it was cool.
What were your impressions just of this interview, Evan, and from like just beginning to end? Because it was very influential, and I want to see what you think of it as someone who is interested in the character, but everything you've said.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I was kind of wondering why they don't, like, do they still do shit like this? Where they sit down and have a whole in-universe interview?
Not really on the shows,
Nah.
but they film a lot of that stuff for the WWE Network for people who want more.
Well, now they're in the business of making shoot interviews, which they
Right.
very much weren't until very recently.
Yeah, that's been since like the last 15 years or so, I'd say.
Yeah, so it's not so much that they're, this is a really, really interesting moment because they're opening the doors of kayfabe just a little bit, but still everything is part of the story that they're telling. Whereas now they have a fairly sharp separation. Like, they'll talk about the wrestlers' real lives and all that stuff, but that's kind of, to some degree at least, kept separate from what's part of the show.
Well, that's the thing. Like, what's interesting about this is one of those moments where wrestling will do a thing where you see this whole universe of potential open up, where like the fact that they're mining his real life for things and then weaving it into the fictional biography of the character. This kind of seems to be like the ultimate expression of like what wrestling is capable of, and like what that kind of what the specific weird kind of storytelling and blend of reality and theater that wrestling is. Like, this seems like a really good example of what you could do with that, possibly.
Absolutely. It doesn't work as well anymore now because we know every detail about these motherfuckers' personal lives because it's all on fucking social media.
Right, that is a problem where there's no mystery, because where would there be time or place for mystery to develop? Where is it where you'll see a guy on TV and then it'll be like, oh, this guy's been wrestling for 15 years, and if you don't already know about it, you had the avenue to know about it as easily as you could have known about it, currently.
Nobody can just actually seem like they come out of nowhere anymore,
Right, yeah,
because
exactly.
they would have, because you would need to establish a base and grind away for many years, and everybody in the industry knows you, and everybody peripheral to the industry who follows everybody on the in the industry on Twitter knows all about what's going on. Yeah.
By the way, I want to say one other thing about this interview. Foley, I guess, in Mankind, whatever he is in the interview, calls out Vince for not hiring him when he was young and healthy and good. He only hired him after he had destroyed his body. And I think that's interesting because he's referencing Vince now in May or June of 1997 as being the boss of the company, well before the Montreal Screwjob.
Right, which is really when they broke kind of the kayfabe that was, oh, Vince is just the commentator.
They had already been doing
it had been cracking. I do like also to bring it just back to pro wrestling with the interview. The end of the interview was after like weeks of people seeing it and getting on Mankind's side. The end of the interview is so interesting in that, Jim Ross asks him the question that finally sets him off. Like, what do you like all this? And he's like, what do you mean? Do I like pain? What part of pain do I like? And then he gets really human. He's like, when does the fun start? When I tell my kid I can't get up to play ball with him? Whoopee. When a doctor comes and says he has to put a 12-inch needle into the discs of my back so I can keep wrestling, and then he gets up and screams at Jim Ross and puts him in the mandible claw and takes him down, and then finds his consciousness and gets up and calls for help. Like, oh no, Mankind did this to Jim Ross.
He took over.
Please help,
And it's really interesting. Like, I was talking about the continuity with the anti-hardcore promos in ECW. There's this critique of especially this hardcore style of pro wrestling here. He's putting it out in front of everyone. Yeah, this has harmed me. This has made my life worse in a lot of ways, and you fans just keep asking for more of it. And I think the fans there was this kind of moment of self-criticism and self-evaluation on the part of the fans, which led to him becoming a hero, which led to them being sympathetic to him.
So, let's move on, because we've said a lot of good stuff. But speaking of him being a hero, that the fans loved him. So he had a long and fantastic feud with our good friend The Rock.
Yeah, and so he starts becoming kind of cute and comedic, and they put him in a shirt and tie because he joins Vince's corporation stable for a little while, and he has this funny, like, odd couple buddy relationship with Vince, which we see in the hospital segment from the October 5th, 1998 Raw. What did you think of this, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, Foley is a great comedic performer, obviously. Implied bestiality joke for a PG-13 production, so that was interesting.
Oh, they went all out, man. They got away with so much shit during the Attitude
They got
Era.
a real clown.
Keep in mind the show was live, and even though they probably didn't do that vignette live, they taped it that day and just gave it to USA.
So we get
Vince and Foley say, by the way, and you'll appreciate this, Evan, like the segment was like, all Vince knew is that Foley was going to bring a bunch of stuff and bother him, and then Vince just played off it.
And
then a clown showed up.
One of those things he brought was the legendary Sacco. This is the introduction of Sacco.
Yes, it is.
This is the introduction to Mr. Sacco. I remember Mr. Sacco being a force in pop culture in the 90s.
Mr. Sacco was one of the most over members of the roster.
And it was great. It was a way
next week on Raw, they told him, do you have, it was a one-off joke, and the next week on Raw, they came to him, it's like, do you have Mr. Sacco? And he's like, I mean, we make Mr. Sacco. And they're like, there's 100 Mr. Sacco signs in the audience. You need to just start doing that. He's like, okay. It beats falling through hard things to hurt myself.
It was a great way of making the mandible claw cute as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't thought of that, but that is really brilliant. Like, you take probably the most horrifying and invasive move I've ever seen in professional wrestling, and then you slap a cute little puppet on it, right? And make it a fun little time that he's having in your mouth.
A cute puppet that's been in his pants this entire time.
Yes.
Potentially on his penis,
Well, I think it's pretty clear it's usually just on his waistband. That didn't stop him from quipping that he was surprised at the success of Sacco because he had been pulling a limp white object out of his pants for years to no applause. And all of a sudden,
genius.
Hey, man, a good dick joke is worth its weight in dicks.
I know, it's a fine joke. That was
we didn't show you the later segment of this whole thing where Austin shows up as like a nurse, like dressed as a nurse, and then clobbers Vince with a bedpan.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
Pretty great.
Yeah, so after this transformation of Mankind's character, we get to he becomes the champion. He gets so over that they actually give goddamn Mick Foley the WWF title.
Yeah.
And there's a great story about that where, they were still neck and neck with Monday Nitro. Monday Nitro had been beating them in the ratings for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. For almost a year at that point, right?
Yeah.
Or over a
year.
Sure.
Over a year at that point.
And Eric Bischoff, because Nitro was live and Raw wasn't usually live. Sometimes it was, but most of the time it wasn't. So Eric Bischoff would get on Nitro and give away the results for the Raw matches before they were broadcast. Like, hey, you don't have to watch this show. This is what's going to happen. And
I know where this story's going.
That's such a dick move.
It's such a dick move, isn't it?
Oh God.
Vince, like, before you say this, and I know we got a timer. So Bischoff didn't do anything to Vince that Vince wouldn't have done. Like, Vince so brutally competed with the territories and put them out of business, and they were stuck at the starting block. So when this was real competition, this was Bischoff saying, oh, you're going to be ruthless? We're going to be ruthless. And yeah, what a dick move, but man, did it get people talking.
Yeah.
And man, did it get people angry.
And it backfired because he was like, so they're going to put the title on Mick Foley. Mankind's winning the title tonight. Really, that loser who like Bischoff had fired, right? And
the phrase is Tony Schiavone said, that'll put butts in seats. Ha.
Right. And so what happened? Immediately, everyone changed the channel to Raw to see Mankind win the title. And it was the first time that Raw beat Nitro in the ratings in this whole time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They said you could track the quarter-hour ratings, and something like 500,000 people immediately hit the button to switch to Monday Night Raw.
Like, Foley's winning the title. I gotta see this.
Exactly.
I wasn't watching at the time, but I would have changed the channel.
Yeah. Yo, title change, right? That's what people want to see.
Doc, you were watching at the time. Did you change the channel? Or were you already...
I may have just been watching Raw, but
You probably were already watching Raw.
I was one of the guys with the remote in my hands going back and forth trying to watch both shows at once.
I'd usually watch the first hour of Nitro because that was when Nitro was 3 hours, but Raw was only 2.
Yeah. Oh my God, 3 hours.
As we've learned by now, 3 hours is too long for a
Yes.
weekly wrestling show.
And I was
Yes.
mainly interested in WWF still the whole time. But, like, yeah, on the commercials, I'd go back to Nitro, hoping to see, like, Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko and Chris Benoit. Because I really didn't care about what was happening in the main event.
I liked Diamond Dallas Page.
Well, WCW had the undercard. WWF had the main event.
Exactly. So, actually, most of those matches that I would want to see would happen in the first hour of Nitro anyway.
Right. You get to see the luchadors.
All right, so Mankind is the WWF champion going into the 1999 Royal Rumble, and they were heating up The Rock to face Austin at Mania. So it ended up being Austin versus Rock for the title at WrestleMania. So I guess they had to get the title on The Rock.
Rock and Austin were clearly the numbers 1 and 2 acts in the company. Not necessarily interchangeably, but that was it. Foley was clearly at this point the number 3 act behind them, and he could feud with either one of them, which was great because, like, obviously the biggest matches would be between Rock and Austin, but they can't just do that every month because you've seen it. So it was Foley's job to keep them apart for the months before WrestleMania.
And it's an interesting character combination. Mankind and The Rock.
Yeah.
Oh, a real study in contrast for sure. It was especially funny when they ended up teaming up as the Rock and Sock connection later on.
A little later.
Yeah, this match is notable for a lot of reasons, but I do want to hear what Evan says first.
Yeah, Evan, let's hear what you think about the Great One versus Mankind.
First, The Rock at this point kind of has like an off-duty Russian Elvis impersonator style.
I wanted to say real quick.
Nailed it.
Definitely.
Nailed it, yeah. He's like Dark Johnny Bravo.
I thought it was crazy
Yeah.
that he does this promo before the match, and his promo is entirely catchphrases. He has like 7 or 8 of them, and he goes through all of them, and he's not even a babyface yet. He's a heel with all of these super over catchphrases. It's amazing.
What this is going to sound like just a description of what talking is, but I don't mean it that way. The Rock just strings words together.
Yeah, and it
in
works.
a way that's and it's flawless. Every
Rudy
single time.
Poo candy ass.
And now he's a millionaire.
Yeah, very few people can actually do that, and he did it through like real, repetition. You can see in the documentary Beyond the Mat, which I watched recently. It's on Netflix.
We'll get back to that.
We'll get back to
in a
that
second.
in a
About that
minute.
a lot here.
They were backstage during this match filming stuff, and they film a minute and they masterfully put it together in the documentary. They show The Rock with Ed Ferrara, one of the writers, essentially working out this promo. It's not as smooth, but he's going through his different phrases. You see him saying something, and then Ferrara giving him a word to fill in, and he's like, yeah, this one. And then they show the clip, and as we watched, the promo where he just strings it all together as, his maximum charisma would allow. And, he's The Rock. He can't...
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing. He could say anything.
At one point, he puts handcuffs on Mick Foley.
Yeah,
and
we're
I was
gonna
like,
talk
oh,
about
he's
that a lot. Yeah.
he's taking him to the private Rock jail where the Rock keeps everybody who doesn't know their role.
And where he takes objects and turns them sideways and stuffs them up their Rudy Poo candy ass.
Yes.
Is that
yes.
Their buttholes, he means.
Is that
right up the butthole.
Is that the Jailhouse Rock?
It is.
Oh!
And
No,
there
I thought
are
it was
no
the
rights there.
SmackDown Hotel. But yeah.
The SmackDown Hotel.
Right,
Yeah, he
that
did
was the-
talk about the SmackDown Hotel a little bit.
On Jabroni Drive and Know Your Role Boulevard.
It's amazing how many like words he just attached to himself that are now his
Yeah.
forever.
He knows how. He knew how. It's amazing.
I wasn't expecting to like this match more than the Shawn match, but I did. Still wasn't like nuts about the match all
Yeah.
in all.
So, let's
but
talk
there,
about-
there was something
we should
about
tell
the
Let
you-
Evan give his
indignation.
impressions. Let Evan give his impressions.
No, just there's something about the indignation of The Rock, in his attitude towards Mick Foley that I found interesting. And the corporate elbow really does seem less warm than the people's elbow. But
Very
that's
true.
it. That's all I got.
The reason why this match is significant and the reason why we chose it, this I thought of as the bad match, is because of that Beyond the Mat documentary. So these people were following Foley around. They were filming a lot backstage. This is really one of the first major exposés of the wrestling business that at least had the involvement of the WWF to some degree, though they came to regret it. And so for this match, I don't remember why he thought this was a good idea, but Foley had his wife and his children sitting front row ringside.
His two young children.
Yes.
Like, I want to say, like, Noelle was, like, 5, and I think Dewey's a little older, right?
Dewey was like 7 by then.
Dewey is a little older, but I don't think Noelle was 5. I think Noelle was 3 or 4.
I think I looked it up, and she was like not quite yet 5. She was like either older 4 or had just turned like 5. But like he has more kids now. By this point, they ended up having 4 kids together. But at the time, he just had the 2, and he invited them like, come watch Daddy's match. It'll be a fun time.
And it ended up being
Wrong.
one of the, if the not the most brutal beatings he ever went through.
In WWE.
I would argue in or out of the WWE because the nature of it was just repeated head trauma.
Yeah, he hits him over the head unprotected with the chair 11 times in quick succession while his hands are behind his back, handcuffed. So not only can he not protect his head with his hands, he can't even put his shoulders forward to sort of take the brunt of the damage in his shoulders and his neck muscles. It's just his head getting clobbered straight up and taking the full brunt of the damage over and over again.
If you're a parent and a wrestler, you should not bring your kid. Like, you should know not to. I understand that there's an urge to be like, oh, like, I want my son to see what daddy does for a living. But, like, they can't parse that yet. They can't figure that out.
It wasn't supposed to be that many times. Rock got carried away for some reason. You could see Foley trying to, like, walk away from it, and it's not working.
By the end, he's trying to escape, yeah.
Foley said they had agreed on like 4 or 5 chair shots, which is plenty, but he didn't realize how bad they would be with his hands tied behind his back like that. And yeah, The Rock got carried away. The Rock, for all his poise, had only been wrestling a few years, and like he probably was just overexcited.
Also, watching it, so he hits him with a couple of them, and I think Foley didn't realize how bad they were going to be, and so didn't even sell, right? Because he's just kind of stunned. And I think Rock was like, he's no selling. I better hit him again.
Yeah, maybe Rock wouldn't have hit him so many times if he went down. But,
Right.
but the idea was he had to get to the top of the ramp for them to do the finish.
Right. The finish where, I don't know, Evan, did you notice something weird about the finish where Mankind says, I quit? Because it's an I quit match. I don't know if we mentioned that.
Oh, yeah, it didn't sound like he said, I quit.
What did it sound
Yeah,
like?
you got it.
It sounded like, oh my God, I'm trying to remember. I fucking should have written it down. It sounded like he said something like, you quit, or I don't know.
He
I can't
said
remember what
I
it sounded.
quit, but what it turned out to be, and this was the gimmick, was that they had played a recording of him saying I quit in like a promo earlier. and had screwed him.
Yeah,
in
that wasn't
way.
actually him talking
That's-
at that moment. It was a recording. It was a complete heel move by The Rock's character.
Of him being like, "You're gonna say I quit," and then they just cut out the "I quit" part.
Oh, I thought I heard different words. I guess I'm just
Yeah, it's
going
okay.
deaf. I guess that's what
That's
that is.
fine.
I'm just losing hearing as I get older. Wear earplugs when you go to metal shows, kids.
What? Yeah. No, it was a brilliant finish, and it was a great way to put over The Rock as like the supreme evil. When you want a heel champion like that, big part of it is convincing the fans that they don't deserve it, which is very difficult when it's a character as lightning in a bottle as The Rock was. But they managed to keep that going, and they needed to keep that going if they wanted to peak at WrestleMania with his match with Austin, which they totally did. Because Austin, they kept keeping away from the title matches, and Austin eventually would win the title. Austin would never hold the title for very long. That's not where the money was, It was in the chase.
Yeah. I think at this point, this is when Mankind was like, when Foley was like, I gotta tone it down a little bit.
Well, he only wrestled full time after this, another year or
Right.
so. He had a much long tail to his career where he'd have occasional matches, but he retired as an active performer in 2000. The damage was already done, man.
It's crazy because they're joking and making comments about concussions the whole match, the announcers.
Yeah.
I did notice that where there's a lot more of a flippant attitude towards serious injury for a long
Yeah.
time. Especially the same thing watching chair shots pre Benoit tragedy is really painful.
And if you actually watch the Beyond the Mat, at some point I think Noelle starts sobbing because she doesn't realize that it's like an act anymore, and then I think Dewey starts crying too. Noelle starts crying first because she's little, and then eventually Colette, his wife, is just oh fuck this, and takes them both and walks backstage to where they were hanging out before the show and just leaves.
And The Rock is
doesn't
their buddy.
leave, but takes them away.
Yeah.
So Foley had said that he had heard horror stories of wrestlers' kids being traumatized because the wrestlers would keep kayfabe completely and tell their kids that they were fighting for their lives every night. And he said
he didn't want to do that.
Well, he
That's
said he went
too
way
dedicated.
too far. He went way too far in the other direction and just told his kids him and his friends were playing. Except then they got old enough to see something like that, and Foley's carried to the back with a gigantic wound on his forehead, and he's like, it's just a boo-boo, which is what he says to them, and they're like, it's a big boo-boo. He's like, yeah, but it's, it's like when you scrape your knee, it's a boo-boo. It's like, no, Mick, you got a giant head wound, a giant,
Dad, you have
gaping,
one
nasty
ear.
head wound. Right.
And to his credit, Foley admits that he made a mistake there and is a family man through and through,
Oh,
and
yeah.
has always been. And you see him afterwards, make nice and everything, like Doc said. It's a boo-boo.
Yeah, and they show him the clip of his wife and children crying, and he says, man, for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm such a great dad. And yeah, once again, within a year of that, he had retired from active competition and would only wrestle occasionally, much to the continued health of his body, which he has certainly paid for everything he did in his 20s and the first half of his 30s, in his 40s and into his 50s.
Now, while I do think this is probably the actual, realistically most brutal match he ever went through, one match we haven't talked about, which is perhaps the most spectacularly violent and extreme match he ever had,
Oh, boy.
and one of the most notable moments in the history of wrestling at this point, we will save for next week's episode. The Hell in a Cell match
all right.
between Mankind
Yeah.
and The Undertaker.
Okay.
It's one of those moments where people within wrestling saw it and thought, okay, maybe we've gone too far, and it's one of those points where they did start backing off.
But people remember
boy.
it as many people, people, it is their favorite match of all time.
Yeah. Foley says the arena only held 20,000 people, but based on the number of people that told me they were there live, it held 50,000 people. Yeah, so do we have any final thoughts on this? This has been a dense episode about a crazy performer.
Yeah, Evan, anything else? Actually, you didn't really tell us all that much about why you thought the Rock match was better than the Shawn Michaels match.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I would say I still don't know how much I like enjoyed the match. I guess I found their character clash more interesting.
Oh, they had more chemistry.
Shawn Michaels' character, in contrast to Mankind's character, is interesting in that he's like, who is this curiosity or something? But it made sense that The Rock was like virulently like upset. Like The Rock is not having any of this Mr. Sacco Mankind business.
He's disgusted by Mankind.
I mean, what you're feeling is Mankind and Foley and Rock's chemistry. Like, they had some of the greatest chemistry of that era.
Yeah.
Like, they eventually ended up teaming, right?
Yeah.
The Rock and Sock connection.
The Rock and Sock connection. They managed to combine their charismas so uniquely. Their segment, where they did just a segment, ended up being like the highest rated segment ever on
This
Raw.
Is Your Life?
Yeah, This Is Your Life, Rock. Which
it's very comparable to it's a segment that's very comparable to the Festival of Friendship.
Yeah, I like the Festival of Friendship better myself, as a Foley and Rock fan.
Are we going to show Evan This Is Your Life?
we
Because
talked
I feel
about
like we
it.
should.
We talked about it, but it's just not really a great segment. Like, it's important.
No,
It's not,
It's
but
like
it's
17 minutes long, I think, and it's
that's too long.
yeah, they went way over and got a lot of crap for it until the rating came out, and we're like, okay, you guys can have as much time as you want.
Is that where the Poontang Pie thing started?
Maybe.
I
No,
don't think
right.
so.
I'm
Because
gonna
they
wrap
bring
this
out The
up
Rock's
now.
like high school girlfriend or something.
Evan has drawn the line.
No, I didn't think you would care much for this, Evan. So.
No.
No. But yeah, I mean, I'm still, I'm not tired of it yet per se. I'm not ready to like. This isn't like at the end of the first Hulk Hogan episode where I was like, oh
Right.
God, what have I agreed to? Like, this is this is interesting.
As you keep kind of saying, you can at least tell very easily that Mick Foley is an interesting artist, even if his
Yes.
art isn't exactly the kind of art that gets you going. And that's
exactly.
perfectly valid.
The next main feed episode, we're going to watch that Hell in a Cell match, but it's not all going to be Foley stuff. So it's going to be other things related.
Okay.
But it's actually going to be stuff that you're going to like a lot less. One of the matches for sure.
Good.
Well,
Oh, joy.
The next episode and its combined what's the word I'm looking for? Its complimentary premium episode are going to be more about the state of modern hardcore and the heights that they reach now 20 years later. And I'm not gonna like some of it for sure, but but it's worthy of talking about, and a lot of people really like it, and we'll get into it a bit. You know?
We're gonna do
I'm much more
hardcore
a fan
blowout.
of like. I'm much more a fan of like stomp your foot and make a face than we'll watch.
No, that's the Doc special.
Yeah, it's the Doc special. Stomp your foot and make a face. Hey, if The Rock's big finish can be an elbow drop that usually either completely missed or hit you in the tricep, why not?
I tend to like more.
All right, this has
technical
been
stuff,
contesting wrestling.
myself, but I also like the stomp your foot and make a face. I like the put somebody in a weird hold and make a face. You know, that's why I like Daniel
Right, it's
Bryan
abdominal
so
stretch time.
much. It's abdominal stretch time.
This has been Contesting Wrestling. If you enjoyed it, you should check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/contestingwrestling. We put out an extra episode every week. It's usually a compliment to the main feed episode of some kind. You should follow us on Twitter @contestingw. Tweet at us. Let us know how you feel about anything, specifically the show, or just what's going on with you. And let us know if there's anything you want to cover, if there's anything you think I should know about that will help me understand wrestling, if there's anything that you think I will hate so much that it would be amusing to you to hear me express my experiences watching it, any of that good stuff. Yeah. We really appreciate you.
We really
And-
do.
Yeah. This has been Contesting Wrestling. We love you.
Bye.